The Legend of Heroes Trails Through Daybreak 2 is the latest and greatest to come out of the series in the West. Going into this release itself, my expectations were very high off from Daybreak 1, which was an incredible experience and was one of my favourite JRPGs to release back in 2024. But that begs the question, does Daybreak 2 stick the landing established by its predecessor? Let's jump right in to find out whether or not our second outing into the nation of Calva was worth the wait. Story wise, I'm only going to be keeping things brief here, with the later half of this video tackling actual spoilers. There will also be a warning before that, so this section is going to be purposefully vague. Where Daybreak 2 really shines with its narrative is how it brings back and handles characters from previous entries like Swin and Nadia after Revere really established them as unique and interesting characters. Daybreak 2 further progresses on their arcs established in Revere and really allows them to shine here given the extra screen time. On top of their semi-protagonist role, you really get a better idea of why they are a team here. Some of your returning party members still have strong arcs, like with Agnes, who is after the 8th Genesis that was left over by her grandfather Professor Epstein. I will say though, some returning characters like Aaron still didn't win me over on the second outing. His personality is still very much unlikable here in my opinion, and still has the same obnoxious running gag of just reminding us that Van is old for being 25 according to anime logic. I did also wish that previous party members had more character development here, but Daybreak 2 does elaborate a lot more on characters like Catra, especially in the middle of the story. It's just that after finishing this title and seeing all that there was on offer, I definitely wish that screen time and development was shared more evenly between the party members, both new and returning. Speaking of, Van is no longer the sole protagonist here. Through the act structures, you'll be seeing different perspectives of the story as you fill in the bigger picture when it comes to tracking down the remnants of Almata, Ouroboros, the Gardens, and the remnants of the 8th Genesis. This review will already assume that you're somewhat familiar with this series alongside the previous entry, since Daybreak 2 also assumes this fact as you play through the game. Similar to the Yakuza games, the reason behind why the Trails series is so frequent when it comes to releases is with the clever way the developers plan ahead of time alongside reusing assets to save on cost and time. With Daybreak 2 being a follow-up entry, this allows Calvard to feel way more fleshed out with in-universe communication devices known as ciphers now being commercially available. The NPCs of Calvard have now established social media and smartphones, further bringing the series into the modern day. Where Daybreak 2 really shakes things up is with its newly introduced narrative device that affects how the story is told. Unexpectedly, at any moment in the narrative, parts will rewind back, creating different timelines where the characters remember events before they were set in motion. This concept is very much inspired by stories like Groundhog Day or AI The Somnium Files if you're familiar with that title. I'll elaborate more on my thoughts with this in the spoiler section, but this new angle definitely had its moments, but in particular with Act 3, I feel like it was horribly implemented in some instances. Don't get me wrong, in the earlier parts of this story, it definitely has its moments. The shocks you see unfold in the narrative because of it really creates for some tense moments. But it's also very much a double-edged sword, with it acting as a deus ex machina, since at all times the protagonist has the Genesis on them, which allows them to go back in time with no repercussions. Some moments also felt unclear as to how to progress in the story without dying and rewinding back time, which really felt forced as a way to implement in this mechanic. I don't dislike this idea in theory, it's not a bad concept at all. Look at AI The Somnium Files to see the potential it has. But in that game, what makes it interesting is that it's not linear. You can branch out without even realizing it and see all these interesting timelines that serve a purpose. But in Daybreak 2, this happens in a linear sense. Every failed timeline is scripted and there isn't any dialogue option to change past before they happen. You have to lose. Maybe somewhere down the line in a future title, this approach will be made more clear, but as it stands, I'm very much conflicted on how it's implemented here. Also, this narrative loves having what if scenarios, sometimes violently showing the characters dying. This is the first installment to be an 18 after previously being a 12 age rating wise. I'm not gonna lie, after being subject to these moments that originally caught me off guard, I began not being able to take them seriously over these instances, mainly just relying on shock value and nothing else. It's not a bad idea to have a little shock value in your story, but subject the audience to it too many times and it begins being too hard to take seriously. But let's take a step back for a moment on my thoughts on the story and talk about the gameplay. In this aspect, Trails Through Daybreak 2 is objectively the best in the series. Environments look better than ever with real-time lighting and vivid locations. In particular, I really liked how Daybreak 2 added more areas to explore around Edith that wasn't available in the first game. Character models are also very expressive and rival some of the biggest JRPGs when it comes to quality character designs and overall presentation. Moving outside of the town areas and into the dungeons, Daybreak 2 still has your traditional affair, but what's new here is the central dungeon, which is designed like an online game. It's a clever way to narratively have all these characters available to level up and build regardless of where they are in the actual story. In the central dungeon, you'll be going up each floor which is randomized, having you completing different objectives. Similar to Mementos or Tartarus from the Persona series, this is your main means of leveling up characters and is the main gameplay loop. I really enjoyed the central dungeon structure in this title. Unlike the Persona games, they never overstayed their welcome and pacing wise felt just right. The introduction of new floors as you progress in the story also never felt too overwhelming because of this. Now, another element that Daybreak 2 really nails it in and is hands down the best installment in its series for is with the combat. Each Trails installment builds off from one another when it comes to both its story and the combat. This might all seem a bit overwhelming, but returning from the previous game is the part action, part turn-based combat system. Daybreak 2 adds in new assist attacks to better get the advantage on enemies, alongside being able to use magic in these sections, giving you even more options. Once you get the stun on the enemy and transition into the turn-based system, things are much more in depth. You have what's known as shards that are a resource that strengthen attacks, alongside your crafts moves that are these really strong skills that have some visual flair and hit stronger based on where you are positioned. These moves look as good as they've ever been. My only wish is that returning characters got new moves, but the new party members all look incredible with these animations. Also, new to Daybreak 2 are EX combos. You can pair with a party member after stunning the enemy to deal even more damage. There really are no negatives worth bringing up. Falcom have really perfected their craft, and honestly I have no idea how they'll top their next entry with just how much they've crammed into the combat system here. New to Daybreak 2 are the Grossritter duo now being playable alongside the fan favourite Ren being added. It's cool seeing Ren's moves be a callback to the Sky series. Every character's attack animations are beautifully animated and are just pure eye candy to watch.
This moonlit blade of mine is false, yet true as steel. There! Behold! Zero's Gleam!
Once again, you can equip quartz to go for specific builds to better complement a character's kit. New to Daybreak 2 from the central dungeon are these character specific items that you can spend on this skill tree mechanic to even further strengthen party members. There are just so many layers to the combat system in this game, but I have to move on from this however, since I could honestly make an entire video on it alone with just how many small details there are. Some extra little bits of gameplay that's been added are these hacking sequences. They're decently fun as a little distraction. Some of the later levels can get tricky. You pretty much want to avoid being detected whilst inputting sequences. I'm also a big fan of the music in these sections. Fishing has also made its grand return and it's better than ever. Granted it is just fishing, so depending on who you ask, this is either the best thing ever or not a big deal. I did like how any party member could fish. I definitely appreciate when devs go the extra mile when JRPGs account for every party member with small interactions like this. The last few side modes that have been implemented is that the card games are back. I'm typically not a huge fan of these, but it's simple enough to pick up unlike of Steel 3 and 4s. Lastly is that you can play basketball now, a bit random out of all the sports, but hey, you can make Ren ballin', so what's not to love here? Another aspect that the Trails series is known for is with its side quests. They are a big part of these experiences. They're not all made equally, but these moments really flesh out the world of Moria. Also, returning from the first game is the alignment system. You have Law, Chaos and Grey. How you determine the outcome of these side quests will result in your positioning of this alignment system based on how you want to side with the Law. Alright, I've been wanting to say this point after finishing the game, but hands down my least favourite thing about Daybreak 2 is how they completely fumbled this mechanic. In the first Daybreak entry, this alignment system was so important as a Spriggan. You can take on requests from numerous types of people. The alignment system really immersed me in this trade that Van performs regularly and helped separate the side quest more from the SSS or Bracer Guild from previous entries. This equated into the midsection of the game with you being given the choice due to plot reasons on who you wanted to side with and was tied directly with the system that you had influenced up until this point. Who you sided with changed your party lineup and gave unique cutscenes and interactions based on whether you chose Lawful, Grey or Chaos. Sadly, in Daybreak 2, the alignment system is purely cosmetic. At no point in the entire story does your alignment actually matter. It feels like they forgot this mechanic was even in the game. I'll spare this rant from going on any longer, but this alignment system being snubbed was what I found most disappointing about Daybreak 2. Alright, now that my general thoughts of Daybreak 2 as a whole has been established, this is your spoiler warning. I'll pretty much be talking about plot specific moments alongside spoiling Trails in the Sky the third. Please skip to this timestamp if you would like to avoid this. Okay, so we'll be here all day if I mention the entire game, but I'd like to address moments that stood out to me in particular when it comes to Daybreak 2. Now, one aspect a lot of media risk when it comes to long form storytelling is changing the context from original stories or character arcs that had previously reached its conclusion. I feel like Ren is a good example of this. Hands down, she's the character in this series that's had the most amount of development and changes throughout the narrative. Seeing her become more outgoing and happier after the horror she went through revealed in 3rd chapter, I'm not going to say specifics by the way, if you know, you know, is some of the strongest storytelling the series has ever had. In the more recent games, they've leaned more into the supernatural side of storytelling, which depending on specific arcs can vary a lot in quality. What irritated me is how they treated Ren's backstory here in Daybreak 2. In Sky the Third, this whole arc hits you over the head with its impact and has that same level of horrifying realness as a character like Angela from Silent Hill 2. I mentioned earlier how the timeline split is sometimes done for the shock value impact and nothing else. An example of this is during the island visit where she randomly kills the party after being possessed by Cross. This moment really comes out of left field, and I was always under the impression that those personalities from Sky the Third weren't actual people, more of what Ren used as a shield to protect herself from the impact of what she was forced into. In the original scene, you really get that horrifying realization of what they represented, and it all hits you when they start disappearing one by one. Originally, I was always under the impression that these personalities weren't actual people, but Daybreak 2 confirms that they were. At the end of the day, it's their story to tell and they can write what they want, I'm just saying my opinion on it all. Daybreak 2 leads more into the supernatural side of trauma, and personally I'm not a huge fan of it. It ends up feeling a little too anime at times and kinda takes away some of what the series built up from its original context. Another example of this issue is with Ketra. It's revealed about their actual identity and gender, with the act kinda just ending after showing them be a failed attempt at being a god. This moment kinda comes out of nowhere, and I feel like it really needed more screen time to settle with the audience. A lot of this story felt rushed at times, but the more supernatural elements felt too out there when originally characters like Ren and Ketra were very much grounded when it came to their original arcs. It all ends up feeling like a quick way to sort of have them be further developed on without adding anything substantial.
Slapping the back of the pack! Wait! Where'd that car come from?
Leno's back in the race? I thought they dropped out already. You trading paint with me?
Sorry, but I'm sending you off course.
I'm like, way!
So when I originally made my previous video on Daybreak 2, it was before reaching Act 3. All I'm gonna say is, man, this act is awful in my opinion. Now, it can be argued that every piece of media is guilty of filler, but wow, is Act 3 so shameless in this fact. It's a shame too, since the previous act with the island revealed multiple bombshells that could have been given further screen time. We lose all the other genesis starting with only just one, and the time loop just keeps going on and on here. You're constantly going backwards to progress reliving the events, as mostly side characters try to kill you after being possessed by the remaining genesis. It's the kind of supernatural element that I mentioned earlier I'm not a big fan of. Also, you spend way too much time in Edith in this game, unlike the previous entry where you're travelling across Calvard. You even have the military chasing you down in Act 3 and at one point destroying Van's vehicle and his apartment. But look, they used the time loop so all the damages are gone. Every time something interesting happens, there are no repercussions because the time loop completely negates it every single time. The finale of this act, with you finally locating the villain, is the highest point of this chapter, and it's honestly great, but the amount of setbacks it took to reach this moment honestly annoyed me by this point. Okay, my thoughts on the final act real quick. Not too bad. I enjoyed the school festival and spending time with your party members. But I've got to say, I'm a little confused here. Why was Elaine pushed so much in this game? She's on the front cover for Daybreak 2, but outside of the first act has next to no screen time or involvement in the story outside of a supporting role. Van and On, yes, makes sense, you know, they're after the Genesis, they have an agreement, but I was always under the impression that Elaine was going to have a much more larger role in this installment. Also, Marty and Garda in your central dungeon has no conclusion for actually finishing it. I was very disappointed by this fact. I thought it was going to play a larger role in the story, but it was forgotten by the end of the game. Anyway, so after obtaining all of the Genesis, we finally uncovered the truth behind the Crimson figure. I didn't mind them bringing Dingo back in universe. I can get why to some degree. It's the supernatural side of storytelling I can get with. But I've got to ask here, why do all the characters just dance at the end like a kid's movie? Also, Fee and Risha are here after not being present at all in this title. And then it just rolls credits and it ends. There's no post-credit section or anything, but despite all this, I really did enjoy my time with this title. Now that we're out of spoiler territory, that begs the question, is Daybreak 2 the best Trails game? Well, unfortunately, despite its highs personally, I wouldn't say it surpasses its predecessor. It has the best combat in the series and its gameplay is top notch, but where it really falters is in its narrative, especially towards the middle and ending sections. Whilst not being the best in the series, it very much can be entertained and I'm very much looking forward to what's next in the world of Zamoria. Also, we've nearly caught up with the Japanese releases, which is really exciting. Alongside the remake of First Chapter, there is still plenty to look forward to for the future of this series. But what did you think of Daybreak 2 or the Trails series as a whole? I'm curious. Also, any feedback on this video would be appreciated. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a nice rest of your day.
Ballin'!